The new Genshin Impact 4.7 banner brings us Clorinde and Alhaitham, as well as Furina and Sigewinne. I hope I pronounced her right. Quite a lot of characters, so you might be wondering, who should I pull for? Well, I'm so glad you're here, because in this video, we're going to talk about exactly that. In fact, we're going to go over each and every single one of these four, talk about what they can do, how strong they are, which teams they synergize well with, and also how free-to-play friendly they are, so you can make the best decision possible on if they would be good for your personal account. And what's more, we're also going to go over the 4-star characters as well as the weapon banner. Quite a lot on the list, so how about we jump right into it. Starting out with yet another French lady who this time goes by the name Clorinde. Clorinde is a brand new 5-star, she's an on-field DPS, and she's a sword user. So let's first go over her kit, her talents, how she's played, and how she works in general. Clorinde at first sounds relatively complicated, but once you look into it a bit closer, you'll see that she's actually relatively straightforward. While yes, she is a sword user, most of her damage comes actually from her pistols, and her normal combo that she does if you don't do anything is not worth talking about, so let's jump right into her gunpowder focus skill. When you press her skill button, you bring her into a certain stance where she pulls out her pistols and infuses her attacks with electro. From that point on, any normal attack you do will be a pistol shot that deals damage to enemies in a cone in front of her. And also at the same time, you gain a certain amount of bond of life over your health bar with every shot that you do. Now, the interesting part here is if you press the elemental skill button again, because what happens then is she will deal a lunging attack, clearing all the bond of life that she has accumulated, and heal herself based on how much bond of life she previously had. What you need to keep in mind here is that the more bond of life you have, the better, right? More bond of life means more healing when you do the lunge attack, and also she has a passive that grants her more crit rate when you have more than 100% of your health bar as a bond of life, and then that bond of life goes up or down. Meaning in an ideal scenario, you want to have her skill on and do those pistol shots until you are at 100% or more with the bond of life, and then you will consume it, giving yourself a lot of heal and also getting the effect from the passive that gives you the crit rate on top. So much for her elemental skill. When it comes to her burst, it becomes much easier though, because this one is one of these, as I like to call them, big bada boom effects, where you press a button, deal a lot of damage, grant yourself a bit of bond of life on the side, and that's basically it. What should be noted here though is that her elemental burst will deal a big chunk of her damage, whereas her skill, the scaling there isn't all too amazing, right? You could get away with not fully leveling it because her skill isn't as strong as you would expect it. And this is also one of the big points when we're talking about her general power. See, Clorinde is an on-field DPS, and as such, she needs to compete with Raiden Shogun, you know, the big star when it comes to electro characters, but also other units like, for example, Sino or even Keqing, who is on the standard banner, and I'm sure many of you out there already have her. And here we come to my main point of criticism when it comes to Clorinde. She does look like she's a lot of fun to play, and you can also get quite some damage out of her, but we're definitely not talking about Arlecchino types of massive damage that outperforms pretty much any other pyro DPS out there. Instead, Clorinde is what I would say above average, but not more. One thing you need to keep in mind with her, which is not so much the case for other characters, but definitely for her, is that a lot of her damage comes from her two passive skills. The one being the one that I already mentioned, where you get crit rate if you have more than 100% bond of life, and the other one is that if other characters in your party trigger electro-elemental reactions, then you will get an electro damage bonus. Both of these passives are incredibly important for Clorinde because the scaling on her skill is not that high, and she needs to have both of these effects on to be able to deal the maximum amount of damage. So yeah, when talking about pure offensive power, she is definitely not bad, but I would say if you're looking for a really powerful electro on-fielder, then Raiden Shogun definitely has the edge over her. One big advantage that she does have though that many other DPS characters don't is that she is incredibly tanky. Because of the fact that whenever you consume her bond of life by pressing the skill button again, you get healed for a bit more than the bond of life that you previously had, she can take a lot of damage, heal that back up, and be fine even without a healer on the team. Most DPSs out there are not like that. But yeah, so much for her kit. Let's now look at which weapons might synergize well with her. And first and foremost, of course, we have her signature weapon, the Absolution, which will also be on the accompanying weapon banner. That's naturally her best in slot. However, there are also great other options, for example, the Mist Splitter Reforged. If you already have that, then I wouldn't necessarily go for the Absolution, just equip that on her and you will be more than fine. But of course, like for most other DPS characters out there, the Battle Pass weapons are always good options. The Lion's Roar would be another nice gacha 4-star, giving you more damage against enemies affected by Electro. Even the Black Cliff Longsword from the shop is not all that bad, and if you want to go really budget and into 3-star weapons, then this is also no problem because the Dark Iron Sword and the Harbinger of Dawn, in my opinion, would do a decent job on her, even though if you're going for a 5-star character, then at some point you might want to level up and not use the 3-star weapon anymore. But now, one big question that you're probably asking yourself is, which teams does she work well in? First of all, because of the fact that she is an Electro on-fielder and has pretty good application if you ask me, she excels in Electro-related reaction teams, those being most of the time Dendro, because Dendro teams are usually the best combination with Electro when it comes to reaction damage. That's why Dendro off-fielders are naturally good with her, talking about Nahida, which is of course the big Dendro off-field star, right? But also Dendro Traveler or even Yao Yao would be a good substitute if you're not having Nahida herself. Then, because of the fact that her personal damage is not that high, I would go and make sure to pair her up with strong sub-DPSs because you need to get that team damage somehow if the main DPS doesn't do it. And here some good and affordable options would be, for example, Fischl and Beidou, both being also Electro characters, so they help each other with the energy particles. But you can of course also mix in Hydro for either a Hyper Bloom approach or an Electro Charge one, with Xingqiu for the budget version or Yelan if you want to amp up the damage a bit more. And one character that's going to be very good with her is also Furina. I mean, who is she not good with, right? But because of the fact that Clorinde has so much personal healing, and Furina with her Elemental Burst buffs the healing of the team, that means Furina will make Clorinde even more tanky, more survivable, while at the same time, of course, doing her thing in buffing the entire team's damage. All in all, as you see, Clorinde has quite the team options, there is flexibility, so even if you're a free-to-play player and you really want to invest into her and go for Clorinde, then there will be a lot of options to build competent teams with her. And with that being said, let's now talk about the final verdict of Clorinde, how I personally would see her. I think Clorinde, the concept in and of itself, is a really good character, but for the wrong game. What I mean by that is that in Genshin, when you're playing quote-unquote meta, you will notice that all the game asks from you is killing stuff as fast and as efficient as possible. When you're playing the Spiral Abyss, it's about the timing. It's not about surviving the challenge in the first place, it's about doing it as quickly as possible. And this is exactly the problem with Clorinde. While she is good, especially in situations where a team might not survive in the first place, but with her it could, right? You would love to play her, you would love to trade in that damage for the added survivability, but the fact is that in Genshin Impact, those situations simply don't happen, except maybe when you're still a relatively new player and your teams are not that well invested. So as it stands right now, I can see her being a lot of fun to play. I mean, her animations look amazing, her gameplay style, her character, everything is really interesting about her, but you gotta be aware that if you go for her, the numbers just ain't there as much as they would be with Raiden Shogun. And before we go on to Alhaitham, I would be super happy if you could maybe spare a like for the video, because it helps big time with the YouTube algorithm, especially for smaller channels like mine, so big cheers for your lovely support. But alright, Alhaitham. He is not that much new, we probably already know him, so I'm not gonna elaborate that much on his kit and go over it a bit quicker. Alhaitham is a sword-wielding Dendro on-field DPS, so we have two on-fielders on the first banner, Clorinde and him, but in contrast to Clorinde, he has a lot of power. In fact, when well built, I would say Alhaitham is one of the top main DPS characters in the entire game right now. His main source of damage is his elemental skill in combination with his normal attacks, because those attacks deal Dendro-infused damage, and the amount of damage that they deal depend on the number of chisel-like mirrors that he has, those little leaf thingies that are floating next to him in the air, and believe me when I say, he can deal crazy numbers. With his elemental skill, he will dash forward, or if you hold it, you can aim where it goes, and deal damage to the enemies, while at the same time giving himself one Chisel-Life mirror, or if you haven't had any Chisel-Life mirrors, you will get two. While you have these Chisel-Life mirrors, as I just said, your attacks will be Dendro-infused and deal quite some damage and hit a big AoE in front of you, so ideally, you want to make sure to always have the maximum of 3 active at any given time. However, his elemental skill is not the only thing that gives him Chisel Light Mirrors. Also, if you do charged or plunging attacks and hit an enemy, you will get another Chisel Light Mirror, and his elemental burst, which deals damage and a big AoE in front of him, can also grant him Chisel Light Mirrors. If he hasn't had any at the point you cast it, you will get 3 right away, and if you had Chisel Light Mirrors, then the burst will deal more damage and last longer, but consume those mirrors. Now, this might all sound complicated, but in my opinion, it really isn't. What you need to keep in mind is that if you don't have any mirrors, use his elemental burst and you will get 3. Then you do your attack combo until you lose 1. Then you can use his skill to fill that back up to 3. Do another attack combo. Then you will lose 1 again. Then you do a charge or plunging attack, fill that up to 3 again. Do another combo, and then you would swap out to the next character, rinse and repeat. There is another way to play him, where you first try to build up 3 Chisel Light Mirrors and then use his burst to consume those mirrors and deal more damage with that burst. It's a bit more front-loaded and it can be useful in some situations, but I would say the most common way to play him is just trying to have as many Chisel Light Mirrors up at all times, do the normal attack, and deal massive damage with it. So much for his kit, and as I also just teased when we're talking about his general power, he is absolutely amazing. If you're looking for raw power as an on-field character for your team, then he is definitely a great option. Let's quickly take a look at his weapon options, which are kind of interesting if you ask me. Of course, first of all, the Light the Foliar Incision, his signature weapon, is naturally his best in slot because it supports exactly what he does and it gives you damage based on elemental mastery. However, it's also relatively specialized, just like Clorinde's weapon as well. And if you don't want to, then no worries, there are other great 5-star options, for example, the Primordial Jade Cutter. This one is a super versatile sword and a nice crit rate stat stick, even though it doesn't have that much base attack. However, because of the fact that Alhaitham scales mainly with elemental mastery and not that much with attack, for him, this is an amazing option, not just because it matches his color, but also because the lower attack doesn't hurt him as bad as it would some other main DPS characters. Then, of course, when we want to go 4-star, the Battle Pass swords are always great options. You could go with the Lion's Roar, because as a Dendro character, he will naturally be paired with some Electro character, and the Lion's Roar gives you bonus damage in that situation. But even if you want to go fully free to play, you could just craft the Iron Sting, which gives you a nice chunk of elemental mastery, and he can make great use of this one, so there are naturally free to play options. Alright, so much for Alhaitham himself. How about now we take a quick look at who to pair him with to get the most out of him. Since he is a Dendro character, that naturally limits his team options a little bit, but still there is quite the flexibility. First and foremost, of course, he loves being paired with Nahida. Nahida is like the core of every strong Dendro team, and especially with him, this really shows. You can definitely build a team around him without Nahida if you don't have her, but if you like him and if you want to get the absolute most out of him, then Nahida in the team is basically a must. The best elemental reactions to focus on would naturally be Hyper Bloom with a Dendro Hydro Electro approach, or any form of Quicken Team, meaning Spread or Aggravate, where you just pair Dendros with Electro characters. If you wanted to build a Quicken Team, you could go for Fischl, Yaemiko, or any other type of Electro off-field. And when you want to go Hyper Bloom, then just use an off-field Hydro character, like for example Xingqiu, like Yelan. You could also use Furina, you could use Kokomi as a healer. There are a lot of options out there, so most accounts should be able to build somewhat of a competent team around him. Now, so much for the teams, but the question remains, even though he is very strong, is he free to play friendly? And when it comes to that, I would say kind of yes, but also not that much. And the reason is relatively simple. While he is a very strong DPS, and you could definitely make a 4-star team around him, if you want to get the utmost out of him, then it is very recommended to play him with Nahida, and Nahida is another limited time 5-star. So with Alhaitham, it's really noticeable if you play him in a purely free-to-play 4-star team or in a more invested 5-star team with his big supports. So yeah, if you're a free-to-play player and you like Dendro, or you maybe even have Nahida already because she's that much of a good unit, then it would be a great idea to invest into him. But if you don't have any of those things yet and you're not that sure if you want to go into Dendro, then I would say better play it safe and pull for someone else. Okay, so much for the 2 big 5-star characters in the first phase. Before we go on to the other 2 5-stars, first take a quick look at the 4-stars that will be accompanying the 2 in the first phase, those being the new 4-star Sethos, Bennett, and Toma. Now, when it comes to this selection of 4 stars, I gotta say, this is weird at best. Hear me out. What we have here in the first phase is a banner with 2 on-field DPS characters on them. These are hyper carries, meaning they do nothing for the team if they are not played on the field. One of them is Electro, one of them is Dendro. And which 4-star characters did Hoyo decide to pair with them? Well, let's look into that. We have Sethos, who is also an on-field DPS character who seemingly does nothing for the team if he's not on-field, and he is Electro. We have Thoma, who is a Pyro Shielder and could work together with Alhaitham if you wanted to build a Burgeon team, because Burgeon is kind of like the only niche where Thoma really works. But on the other hand, Burgeon is also like a really niche off-meta team that most players don't want to play. And finally, we have Bennett, who in and of himself is a really good character. You know, he buffs a lot, he heals the team, all that good stuff, but he synergizes like absolutely 0% with the 2 other characters because Alhaitham does not really need Bennett, not even in the Burgeon team, and Clorinde, well, she zips around so much, her kit is all about movement, so staying in Bennett's circle is gonna be a pain when you play her. Alright, so much for the first phase of the banner with Clorinde and Alhaitham. The second phase, though, will probably be the one that is most interesting for most of you out there because we get the long-awaited Furina rerun with the lovely Hydro Lady that buffs the living heck out of all your teams, so let's talk about her now. Furina is easily one of the best 5 overall characters in the entire game. She is just incredibly strong and kind of does it all. She is a sub-DPS character, can heal the team too, and buff the absolute crap out of the damage output of your entire team. First of all, her normal attacks don't matter at all. Her elemental skill has 2 different versions. In the damage dealing version, she summons 3 sea creatures which will attack enemies on the field automatically even if Furina swaps out. And then she has a healing version of her skill where she summons 1 creature that doesn't do anything to enemies, but it will heal your current on-field character. To make it really short, even though this healing function is nice, you will probably never use it and go for the full damage approach. The special thing with her damage dealing creatures is that whenever they deal damage to an enemy, Furina will drain a portion of the health of your entire team. So your entire team will constantly lose health as Furina sea creatures attack enemies on the field. And while the damage of those sea creatures is definitely really nice, the thing that buffs your entire team's damage is her elemental burst, where she first creates damage on an AoE around her, and then she starts stacking so-called fanfare stacks. Here's how that works. For all of the characters in your team, for every % of health that they lose or gain that goes up or down, Furina will get 1 fanfare stack. And then for every fanfare stack that she has, the team's damage output will be increased. In other words, what that means is, you pop her burst, you pop her skill makes that the entire team is going to lose health, so because of that health change, she will get fanfare stacks and the team damage will be increased. And then you ideally want to pair her with a team-wide healer who can compensate for that loss in health so that she gains her stacks not only from reducing the team health, but also from the healer healing that back up. So you'll get a lot of those stacks really quickly, the team damage will go through the roof, and everybody is happy. Also, one thing to note here is, while her burst is on, all healing effects in the team will be stronger, so it's easier to compensate for the health loss that she causes. Now, when we're talking about Furina's power, then naturally she is absolutely incredible. Even though she's mainly a team buffer, her off-field damage is quite noticeable, right? And then of course her damage buffing potential for the entire team is next level. When it comes to her weapon options, then guess what? Her signature weapon, which will also be on her accompanying weapon banner, is her best in slot. However, it should be said though that it is not all that amazing for other characters because it's like really tailor-made for specifically her use case. If you don't want to go for it, which would be completely understandable, one thing you could also do is go for the Favonius sword as a 4-star weapon that probably most accounts out there will have a copy of. Because it is so important to use her burst to buff up the entire team, and it can happen that in specific team combinations, Furina struggles a bit with her energy economy, so going for the Favonius sword will definitely make sense in those scenarios. But also, if you're completely free to play and you don't want to pull for any weapons on the gacha, no problem. There is a craftable weapon in Fontaine, the Fleuve Cendre Ferryman, which is kinda nice on her, but let's be real here, this pipe looks hella ugly and I don't know man, I would rather see if I can get a Favonius sword. But now, let's talk about a happier topic, which would be her team flexibility, which is crazy good, right? Furina, being a Hydro character, naturally fits in tons of different team combinations out there. And because of the fact that she gives so much damage to the entire team, that also makes off-meta teams that kind of were frowned upon before absolutely playable in higher level content after her release. The only real thing that she loves to be paired with is a team-wide healing character. Someone like, for example, Jean, or who's also very amazing would be Sigewinne, because those characters can heal the entire team while she drains the HP of the entire team, making the fanfare stack gain even stronger and also compensating for the negative effect of, losing your health. Now, let's quickly also talk about her free-to-play friendliness in general, and as you probably already heard of what I said before, this is pretty good. We have good free-to-play weapon options, we have tons of options to build teams around her that work, she doesn't need any specific 5-star character to be good with, and just in general, the massive damage that she provides puts her in a position where I personally would say, if you're free-to-play and you want to build a strong account, then absolutely go for her, because she gives so much free damage, even for teams that are not fully optimized with all their maximum potential costly 5-star equipment. So yeah, if you're taking away anything from today's video, then that should be that in the next phase of this banner, you will get one of the literal best characters in the entire game. So if you have some Primo saved up, then Furina is going to be the one to go for. And now, last but I want to say not least, but actually also least, let's talk about Sigewinne, the other new 5-star character that will come in 4.7. And she, to me, she kind of seems like the CEO's 7-year-old daughter was given a piece of paper and a pencil and she could draw down anything that she likes plus the effects of that character, and then they were just like, you know what, let's put it in the game. Usually I really try to not be disrespectful to any of the characters in the game, and I'm sure Neuviet is gonna punish me big time for it because he loves Melusines, but darn man, she is really not good. In my opinion, she's more like a 4-star character in disguise than an actual 5-star. So let's take a look at her kit and see what is wrong here. Sigewinne is a 5-star Hydro Bow user, and she is a healer. Her elemental skill charges up a Hydro Bubble that will bounce from enemy to enemy and heal the entire team except herself for each bounce that it does, and only on the last bounce will it actually heal her a bit too. However, that's it for the positives. Her damage is completely abysmal. Like her normal and charge attack, while it looks kinda nice, you're not gonna use that, and her elemental burst, all that it really does also is damage, and then again, the damage is really not good, and she's an off-field healer, and that requires her to be on the field for longer, so it kind of contradicts her purpose in and of itself. This is, by the way, also why I don't want to talk that much in detail about her, because I think it's just not necessary all that much. The most important information that you need to know about her is that she is a team-wide healer, she does provide a decent amount of healing, and she does do that from off-field, so that's her positive. If that is something that you really need, and you really need that right now, then Sigewinne might be an option, but she comes with so many disadvantages. Her mechanics are clunky, and she consumes too much on-field time for what she does. When it comes to weapons, then yeah, sure, she has her signature, which is probably going to be her best in slot, even though we don't know any details about it just yet. But since her damage is pretty much non-existent anyway, and her burst is not really worth the time spent on the field, I think neither weapons that focus on damage, nor weapons that focus on energy recharge for the character are really worth it for her. Instead, anything that gives her more maximum HP and therefore more healing would be recommended, but if you want my personal advice, don't invest all too much on her weapon should you decide to get her, just because she herself is not all that good and you don't want to throw that many Primo Gems into the garbage. When it comes to her teams though, due to the fact that she is a healer and she is Hydro, naturally she's very flexible and pretty much goes with everything. Just one thing you need to keep in mind is that her Hydro application is not really good, it's very single target based, so if you were to go against a single target enemy, her Hydro application could be good. Against groups though, it's pretty bad. And if you want a Hydro healer, then pretty much in most scenarios, Kokomi would be the better 5-star option for you, even though she does not have the team-wide healing, but her damage is better, her application is better, and just in general, there are better healer options out there. When it comes to free-to-play friendliness, In terms of team flexibility and what you can build with her, yes, she fits into every free-to-play team, just like kind of every other healer does, right? But for a free-to-play player, I would not recommend her because pulling for her will cost Primo Gems, and if you're free-to-play, you're always going to be short on Primo Gems, so you really want to make those gems count and go for the characters that are strong. And when it comes to that, Sigewinne is very, very, very low on the list. So yeah, better skip her and go for Furina instead, because she's just that much better for pretty much every account out there. And now, before we wrap the video up, let's quickly also talk about the weapon banners, both in the first and the second phase. In the first phase, we have the Absolution, which is the signature weapon of Clorinde, and the Light of Foliar Incision, which is the signature for Alhaitham. And just like with all weapon banners, and I say this again and again, unless you have all the 5-star characters for your account that you really want, I would never recommend to pull on the weapon banners because it can cost so many Primo Gems to get the weapon out of it that you want. And especially on this weapon banner, this message hits home really hard. While the Absolution is of course the best weapon for Clorinde, and the Light of Foliar Incision is the best weapon for Alhaitham, both of these characters can be very good with other, more versatile swords that you might or might not even have. So only if you really want to hardcore invest into those characters would I say it might be worth it pulling on their weapons. Especially for Alhaitham, while the Light of Foliar Incision is very strong on him, if you don't have Nahida, then it's kind of like the wrong priority, right? The biggest buff for Alhaitham is giving him Nahida and not giving him his sword. Only if you have Nahida already and you look for even more vertical investment, then it would be a nice idea to go for his sword as well. But at the same time, it might be risky. Due to the fact how the weapon banner works, it could always end up being the Absolution instead of the Light of the Foliar Incision. And the Absolution is just such a specialized sword that it only really works on Clorinde, and for any other character out there, it's just a subpar stat stick. And if you now want to know which are the most important characters to have for any account out there, then definitely don't miss this guide right here. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, travel smart.